This video is part of a series of videos that I am publishing about my attending the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights briefing on language access for individuals with limited English proficiency. If you want to see all of the videos in this series, please go to this video's description down right below the video, and you should be able to find the links to the other videos as well as a link to a playlist that contains all of the videos. Moving on to the first panel. The first panel was overview of the current language access landscape. So we start off with Dr. Yoonju Nam, who is an associate professor at the University of Buffalo School of Social Work, which I'm actually quite familiar with. Adams was staring her down a lot of the time she spoke. I also experienced this with Adams when myself and another interpreter colleague whom I sat with, we were in clear view of him, and when we spoke Spanish, he was glaring at us quite angrily. So this was a repeat theme in Adams' conduct. But anyways, Dr. Nam provided a lot of great data on people with LEP while showing her slides. That being said, she cites a lack of detailed data on language access for people with limited English proficiency, which is fair. She does talk about child interpreters, untrained interpreters, a bunch of other things that I'm sure if you all listen to it, you'll be like, whoa, I like this person. A lot of this stuff is familiar to me, but it's nice to hear the numbers. Next up was Dan Morinoff, the executive director at the American Civil Rights Project. Interesting, because when I came up to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, he showed up at the same time, and he said he was going there to the person at reception, and I was like, oh, well, it's good to have a buddy. Let's go together. So if one of us gets lost, both of us will get lost, right? And, I was being friendly, like I usually try to be, but he was very cold, would shut off. I was kind of like, okay, well, maybe I just rubbed this guy the wrong way. Well, it became clear why, when I said that I was a Spanish medical interpreter, that he didn't like this. So he is the executive director of the American Civil Rights Project. Just looking at their blog, you can see that they seem to have an issue with marginalized groups, and marginalized groups being afforded certain rights. And just, it certainly seems that this organization seems to have an issue with claims that racism is a real thing. So just kind of setting the stage for this person's comments. So in his testimony, he states that existing case law does not have, quote, good authority to make the jump from national origin to English proficiency or lack thereof. What does that mean? That means Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 states that you cannot discriminate against people in federally funded programs based on race, color, or national origin. National origin has been well established, and quoting Bruce Adelson here, through a mountain of U.S. case law, that national origin includes someone's ability or inability to speak English. That's why it's discrimination if you don't provide language access, basically. But he's claiming that is false. He also states, and I quote, however admirable it might be to assert that non-English speakers, end quote, should have language access using federal funds is not ensured in Title VI. News to me, saying it contains nothing about language minorities. He claims that, quote, supermajorities of national origin groups speak English well, that national origin and English proficiency are not explicitly linked. So that was some interesting testimony, not a perspective that I can claim to have ever heard before, and is quite often refuted by very well-known authorities on language access law. And much to my delight, Dr. William Bill Rivers was next to give his testimony. He is at W.P. Rivers and Associates. He states that statutes such as Title VI and Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act explicitly provide the legal basis of language access. So he's basically like, this guy who came before me, He talks about existing language access laws, the kind of landscape that we're looking at in medical and legal spheres. He says that he gets the question about AI and machine translation very often. And he asserts multiple times that AI is an outgrowth of MT, or machine translation. An example of machine translation would be like Google Translate. He claims that both still make major mistakes, things that we all know. Much to my delight, he mentioned the critical mistranslation on the Virginia Department of Health's website that in their Spanish translation stating that the COVID-19 vaccine was not necessary. I love that he mentioned that because I am from the state of Virginia, and this was something that myself and many other people brought to their attention that they didn't really do anything about until it made national news. He does state that after the executive order declaring English as the official language of the United States, but not explicitly because of it, that 7 major federal language access contracts were rescinded. So we are seeing some consequences under this current administration. Next up, we have John Tanner, the former chief of the voting rights section in the Department of Justice. So he talks about voting rights, how people must receive language assistance when they're voting, that he's very disheartened by the decrease in language access. And I love this quote. He says, some of the problems the counties faced were just sloppiness. And he gives some really good examples. He says a school district translated school children as cabritos. So cabritos technically means little goats. He also talks about how poll workers were laughing at the fact that a voter couldn't speak English, and instead of providing assistance, that person ended up not getting provided assistance and leaving and not voting. Now, he does actually respond to the earlier comment by Adams about non-citizens registering to vote. He's like, yeah, sure, we probably have non-citizens who are registering to vote, but it's probably because those forms that they're filling out aren't translated, and they might not understand that citizenship question. So if you don't have a form translated, people are more likely to check something that's not true. So he's actually forming the argument here that providing language access reduces voter fraud. And then the last person on the panel to speak was Jacob Hofstetter, a policy analyst at the Migration Policy Institute. He summarizes and reiterates a lot of the points that were already made. He also talks about the rescission of Executive Order 13166 and reiterates that this rescinds 25 years of guidance, which is a big deal. And that the Department of Justice is going to be coming out with new guidance, but that guidance will likely be less detailed. It's hard to compete with 25 years of detailed guidance. And that this will likely affect a wide range of government programs across the country. So we're hearing about how the rescission, how taking away Executive Order 13166, which was accomplished by the recent executive order declaring English as the official language of the United States, how that executive order is likely going to be affecting language access from the perspective of subject matter experts. Mr. Hofstetter states that progress has been made in the past 25 years in language access at both state and local levels, but that this executive order declaring English as the official language of the United States stands to threaten that. And that as a result, state-level laws will likely become more consequential, which I totally agree with. The first thing that I did when I found out about Executive Order 13166 being rescinded, I called my lawmakers and I was like, we need to have state-level legislation enshrining language access. It's the best defense we have against national, federal rollbacks on language access. And then after the panelists speak, there are questions from the commissioners. I'm not going to go through all of the questions, but I've pulled out some of the greatest hits. So Magpante or Magpantai, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that name, asks, if you were to advise the Attorney General Hofstetter, what could we suggest for guidance? Hofstetter says, more guidance is needed, not less. So if we're rescinding 25 years of guidance, that's not a good thing. and that 25 years of guidance has been foundational for state-level language access. Adams, my best friend, said very sarcastically, asks Tanner pointed questions about voting rights. Adams wants Tanner to mention in his comment voter fraud of non-citizens with limited English proficiency. He then further asserts that language assistance is imposed on people with limited English proficiency in polling places. So then Adams gives the scenario at DMV where there's a pop-up asking if you're a citizen or not. And then Tanner comes in and says, well, people without limited English proficiency might not answer correctly if they don't know what the question means. Mag Pante asserts that providing language access will reduce voter fraud. Adams is encouraged to stop asking questions. So they said what was on my mind. And then Adams asks about penalties to someone who is registered to vote, who's not eligible to vote. That is not the scope of this briefing. Tanner responds that he imagines that it's jail time, but he's not sure. And Adams expresses verbally that he wanted to hear deportation. Mondaire Jones, who is one of the Democrats, comes in and says that voter fraud is incredibly rare. And he seemed a little bit incredulous at this. He was kind of like, why are you even talking about this? Like, this is not based in fact at all. Vice Chair Victoria Norse, who is a Democrat, asks Hofstadter, how will the executive order declaring English as the official language of the United States affect federal services? Hofstadter says that now federal agencies can kind of pick and choose their level of language assistance they'd like to provide. And while some agencies already have specific policies addressing this to kind of fill the gap, he is concerned about downstream effects. As in, okay, if we cut out these requirements up here, we're going to start seeing some effects down here. Victoria Norse also asks for Bill to give some input. And he says that we are now seeing HUD documents, so the Housing and Urban Development, I believe, documents that were available in other languages being made inaccessible or difficult to access. So there had been a previous assertion that, they didn't remove any documents in other languages from government websites, but that's just not true. Bill also says that the rescission of Executive Order 13166 and the guidance that comes with it will make it easier for someone to say, no, go home and get an interpreter. We're not going to provide you with language access. I have said it up until this point in comments and things like that I think a lot of people are taking a very rosy view, a very positive, a very optimistic view of how that executive order declaring English as the official language of the United States is not a good sign. I'm definitely more pessimistic about this. And we are seeing this from these experts on this panel that they're very concerned. They're very concerned. So we as interpreters and translators should also be concerned. Garza, who is the chair, asks Dr. Nam, what can the federal government do to support organizations filling in the gaps, as in filling in the gaps of language access? Dr. Nam says, if you don't, and this is a quote, if you don't understand the culture and the context of the community, end quote, language access is insufficient. She claims that word-to-word translation doesn't work. We all know this. But it's worth her saying this because the commission likely does not understand this fully. It's clear that at least one person on the commission, whose name I will not mention, does not understand this. She also says that there are many community members willing to help, but they are unpaid. I thought this would have been a perfect time to mention that there are many professional interpreters and translators. And while we are paid, many of us are not paid nearly enough to do what we do. But I like that she mentioned the unpaid labor of community members because this oftentimes gets glossed over. Kirstenau, who is the person that Donald Trump wanted to kind of take over as the chair, kind of force through as the chair. Kirstenau asks to anyone, how might AI mitigate this need for language assistance? Bill Rivers pops in like a champ. He mentions once again that AI is an outburst of machine translation, like Google Translate. So it came out of machine translation. And so he mentions that there are guidance documents on where AI use is appropriate and not. And he asks pointedly to Commissioner Garza, the chair, would you replace yourself, Commissioner Garza, with AI? And she was like, she made a face. He says AI is not artificial. It's human-made, and it's not intelligent. All it's doing is creating a stream of text. It's not always accurate or appropriate. He says that machine translation is used widely in translation and localization, but that a human being is almost always in control. You're not going to use machine translation or Google Translate for a depo, okay? Not an AI interpreter in a court case. And that one of the main issues with that is accountability. If there's a misinterpretation, who's paying for it? When you're relying upon the services of a professional interpreter or a professional translator, there's a clear path to accountability. That interpreting or translation agency, that language service company has insurance. And he claims, we love technology, we love easy solutions, but sometimes the best solution is old school. And I say this all the time with your interpreting notes. Don't take your interpreting notes on a tablet, on a computer. You never know where that data is being saved. There's digital security to contend with here too. Tanner describes machine translation errors in the voting arena, and that it's a very complex thing when things even get translated in the first place. So kind of illustrating to the commission that, language access is not a simple thing.